The golden hues of the setting sun bathed Maplewood Estates in a soft, amber glow. It was the kind of neighborhood where every lawn was perfectly trimmed, the sidewalks were pristine, and the houses, large, elegant, and uniform, stood like silent sentinels under the evening sky. A place where the quiet was almost too perfect, broken only by the occasional bark of a well-groomed dog or the distant hum of a luxury car rolling through. 16-year-old Jamal Carter adjusted the strap on his gym bag as he walked, his headphones drowning out the world with the steady rhythm of hip-hop beats. The scent of freshly cut grass lingered in the air, mixing with the faint whiff of pavement still warm from the day's sun. It had been a long day: school, basketball practice, and now the familiar, exhausting journey home. Normally, he'd take the bus, but today he opted for a shortcut through Maplewood, shaving off a few minutes from his commute. It wasn't unfamiliar territory. His best friend lived just a few blocks away. But he also knew this wasn't the kind of place where people expected to see someone like him walking alone. And inside one of those pristine homes, behind an immaculate bay window, Margaret Dawson was watching. Margaret had lived in Maplewood Estates for 15 years. She knew every face, every car, every routine. A woman of order and predictability, she found comfort in familiarity. But tonight, something unsettled her. A teenage boy, tall, black, wearing a hoodie, carrying a bag, walking alone. Her fingers curled around the armrest of her chair as she observed from behind sheer curtains. Who was he? Was he just passing through? Did he belong here? She told herself she wasn't overreacting. After all, isn't that what good neighbors did? Stay vigilant, keep an eye out for anything that seemed off? A flicker of hesitation passed through her. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe he was just a kid heading home. But then again, what if he wasn't? A creeping doubt, small but insistent, settled in her chest. She exhaled sharply, reached for her phone, and stared at the numbers on the screen. Better safe than sorry. And with that, Margaret dialed 911. Margaret Dawson hesitated, her thumb hovering over the call button. The glow of the evening sun cast long shadows across her living room, but all she could see was the boy outside, walking, looking around, carrying that bag. Her heart thumped. What if he was up to something? She had never seen him before. Not in this neighborhood. Not on her street. And in Maplewood Estates, unfamiliar faces stood out like ink on white linen. She took a breath, pushed away the nagging doubt at the back of her mind, and pressed call. 911, what's your emergency? Margaret's voice wavered, but she steadied herself. Yes, I'd like to report a suspicious person in my neighborhood. Can you describe them? The dispatcher's voice remained calm, routine. It's a teenage boy. Black, tall, wearing a hoodie. He's carrying a bag and looking around like he's checking out houses. I've never seen him before. The dispatcher paused. Is he doing anything illegal? Margaret bit her lip. No, not exactly. He wasn't breaking into cars, he wasn't sneaking into yards, but something felt off. Well, no, but this is a very quiet neighborhood. I just thought someone should check. That was enough. We'll send officers to take a look. Margaret exhaled, feeling a weight lift. She had done her part. If it was nothing, no harm done. If it was something, well, she would have stopped it before it began. Outside, Jamal Carter remained blissfully unaware of the ticking clock against him. His music pounded in his ears as he walked, scrolling through his phone to switch playlists. He had no idea that, just a few streets away, a police cruiser was already on its way. Inside the squad car, officers Mitchell and Torres scanned the incoming report. Possible prowler, male, black, mid-teens, carrying a bag. Mitchell, a stocky officer with 15 years on the force, scoffed. A prowler? In Maplewood? Sounds like someone just got spooked. Torres, younger and newer to the job, glanced at him. We still have to check it out. Mitchell nodded, flipping on the cruiser's lights as they sped toward the neighborhood. 2 blocks away, Jamal suddenly felt the air shift. A sharp, piercing whoop of a siren split through the quiet, the kind that sent a jolt of adrenaline through your spine, even when you knew you hadn't done anything wrong. Jamal pulled out his headphones, turned around, and froze. A police cruiser pulled up fast. Too fast. The doors flung open. Hey! Stop right there. Jamal's heartbeat slammed against his ribs. He hadn't done anything, but he knew this wasn't just a random stop. Mitchell stepped out first, hand hovering near his holster. What's in the bag? Jamal blinked, trying to steady his voice. My basketball gear. Taurus took a step closer. Where you headed? Home. Mitchell scoffed. That right? What's the address? Jamal opened his mouth to answer, but before he could, Taurus grabbed his bag, and just like that, everything changed. Jamal's pulse pounded in his ears as he watched Officer Taurus unzip his bag. Hey, that's my stuff! He instinctively reached forward, but Officer Mitchell stepped between them, his hand still near his holster. Relax, kid, Mitchell muttered, rummaging through the bag. Sweaty gym clothes, a pair of sneakers, a water bottle. Nothing remotely suspicious. Taurus hesitated, exchanging a glance with his partner. It's just basketball gear. Mitchell, unfazed, zipped the bag back up but kept his stance rigid. What were you doing in this neighborhood? Jamal's fingers clenched around the strap of his bag. He knew how this worked. He had heard the stories, seen the news, but now it wasn't a news clip or someone else's experience. It was happening to him. I live here. His voice was steady, but his chest felt tight. Mitchell's eyes narrowed. Where? A few blocks over. Mitchell let out a short, dry laugh. That right? What's the address? Jamal swallowed hard. 17 Oakmont Drive. Taurus glanced at Mitchell again. It was a legitimate address, right inside the neighborhood's border. For a second, doubt flickered in his eyes. But Mitchell wasn't convinced. You always take this route? Mitchell pressed. Sometimes, Jamal said. Then why did someone call the cops on you? The question hung in the air like a blade. Jamal didn't have an answer, at least not one Mitchell would accept. Because I don't look like I belong here. Because someone saw me and assumed the worst. Because no matter how many times I do everything right, I'll always be a suspect first. But saying any of that wouldn't change a thing. So he stood there, gripping the strap of his bag, his nails digging into the fabric. Mitchell exhaled, shaking his head. Let's run his name, see if he checks out. Taurus hesitated. Mitchell, it's just a kid walking home. The sound of tires screeching cut him off. A sleek black SUV rounded the corner, moving fast but controlled. It pulled up with a sharp halt just a few feet away. The doors swung open, and out stepped Victoria Carter. She didn't rush. She didn't shout. She didn't have to. Dressed in a navy blazer, her heels clicking against the pavement, she moved with a quiet authority that commanded attention. A woman accustomed to walking into rooms where people questioned her power and reminding them exactly who she was. And right now, her eyes were locked onto Mitchell and Taurus like two targets in her crosshairs. Jamal exhaled, tension melting off his shoulders. Mom. Victoria held up a hand, a silent message. I've got this. Mitchell's posture stiffened as recognition dawned on him. He had seen her before, on TV and city meetings shaking hands with officials, but it took his brain a second to catch up to the reality of the moment. They had just stopped the mayor's son. Taurus was the first to speak. Ma'am, I need you to step back. We're handling a situation here. Victoria's gaze didn't waver. Oh, I see that, she said, her voice smooth but sharp enough to cut through steel. And what exactly is the situation? Taurus opened his mouth, but no words came out. Mitchell cleared his throat. We received a call about a suspicious person in the area. Victoria arched a brow. Suspicious? Taurus shifted. We stopped him to ask some questions. We need to confirm if he actually lives here. Victoria let out a slow, measured breath. Then, without a word, she reached into her bag, pulled out her phone, and tapped the screen. She held it up. On the screen was Jamal's student ID, their home address, a picture of them together at a recent community event. Silence. Mitchell's jaw tightened. Taurus looked increasingly uncomfortable. Victoria wasn't done. So tell me, she said, voice unwavering, did you stop him because he was suspicious, or because someone assumed he didn't belong? Neither officer answered, and behind them from the front porch of her house, Margaret Dawson stood frozen, watching it all unfold. The second Victoria had stepped out of that SUV, she recognized her, and the moment the pieces clicked together, her stomach dropped. She had called the police on the mayor's son. She had called the police on a kid walking home. And now she was watching a mother, a woman with more power than she could ever imagine, stare down two officers who suddenly had nothing to say. But just because they had gone quiet didn't mean Victoria was done talking. Victoria Carter didn't rush. She didn't need to. Her heels clicked against the pavement with precise, deliberate steps, the sound cutting through the tense silence, like a metronome marking the shift in power. She carried herself like someone who had walked into countless rooms where her authority was doubted and left no room for debate. As she approached, Officer Mitchell squared his shoulders, trying to maintain control of the situation. But Victoria had already taken it from him the moment she stepped out of that SUV. Jamal Carter stood a few feet away, his bag still slung over one shoulder, but the tension in his stance had shifted. His mother was here now, and she wasn't here to ask permission. "Ma'am, I need you to step back," Torres said, but his voice lacked conviction. Victoria barely spared him a glance. "And why is that?" Her voice was smooth as glass, but with an edge sharp enough to draw blood. Mitchell cleared his throat, still trying to assert control. "We received a call about a suspicious person in the area. We were just following procedure." Victoria tilted her head slightly. "Suspicious?" Torres, shifting uncomfortably, gestured toward Jamal. "We stopped him to ask some questions. We needed to confirm if he actually lives here." Victoria let out a slow, measured breath. Then, without a word, she reached into her bag, pulled out her phone, and tapped the screen. She held it up. On the screen was Jamal's student ID, their home address, a picture of the two of them at a recent community event. Silence. Torres looked away. Mitchell's jaw tightened. But Victoria wasn't done. She took a slow step forward, her eyes never leaving them. "So tell me," she said, her voice unwavering, "did you stop him because he was suspicious, or because someone assumed he didn't belong?" Neither officer answered, and from the doorway of her house, Margaret Dawson stood frozen, watching. The second Victoria had stepped out of that SUV, she had recognized her, and the moment the pieces clicked together, her stomach dropped. She had called the police on the mayor's son. She had called the police on a kid walking home. Margaret wanted to look away, to retreat inside, to pretend this moment wasn't happening. But she couldn't, because now Victoria Carter was looking right at her. "Was it you?" Victoria asked, her gaze locked onto Margaret. Margaret opened her mouth, but no words came out. She could feel the weight of the moment crushing her, pressing down on her chest like a stone. She hadn't meant for this to happen. She wasn't racist. She was just being cautious. But now, standing on her porch, watching a mother, one of the most powerful women in the city, forced to defend her own son for simply walking home, she realized something terrible. She hadn't been protecting her neighborhood. She had been protecting her fear. Margaret Dawson stood motionless on her porch, her hands gripping the doorframe as if it could anchor her to something solid. But nothing felt solid anymore. Victoria Carter's gaze was locked onto her, unwavering, demanding something Margaret couldn't give, an explanation that didn't make her sound exactly like the kind of person she had always insisted she wasn't. "Was it you?" Victoria asked again, her voice quiet but cutting through the air like a blade. Margaret swallowed, her throat dry. I just thought," she started, but even as the words left her lips, she knew they weren't enough. She thought what exactly? That a black teenager with a gym bag didn't belong in her neighborhood? That his presence alone was reason enough to dial 911? That her unease, her fear, mattered more than the consequences of what she had set in motion? Victoria didn't blink. She didn't need to say the words out loud. Margaret already knew. Her stomach twisted as she looked at Jamal, standing there beside his mother. He wasn't a threat. He never had been. But the sight of him, tall, black, alone, had been enough for her to make a choice. A choice that, in another place, on another night, could have ended very differently. Her chest tightened. Victoria took a step closer, her voice steady, but carrying the weight of something deeper. "Do you know what could have happened here?" Margaret lowered her eyes, shame creeping up her spine, because she did know. She had seen it before, on the news, in the headlines. A phone call, a misunderstanding, a life lost. And now, for the first time, she had to ask herself, was the danger ever really him, or had it always been her? The ride home was silent. Jamal Carter stared out the window, watching the streetlights blur past, but his mind was stuck in that moment. The flashing sirens, the way they searched his bag, the way they looked at him like he was a threat first, a person second. His mother, Victoria Carter, gripped the steering wheel a little tighter. She had always known this day would come. She just hadn't expected it to be so soon. "You okay?" she finally asked. Jamal let out a slow breath. "I don't know," she nodded, understanding, because she didn't know either. "What would have happened if you weren't there?" he asked, his voice quieter now. Victoria's stomach clenched. She had an answer, but not one she wanted to say out loud. Across the neighborhood, Margaret Dawson sat alone, staring at the phone in her hands, the same phone that could have changed Jamal's life forever. She had thought she was protecting her home. Now, for the first time, she questioned what she was really afraid of. And now, ask yourself, how many times has a call like this ended differently? Maybe it's time we stop pretending not to see it. Maybe it's time we do something about it. If this made you think, share it, talk about it, subscribe. Let's make sure the next call ends differently.